Hello, and welcome to yogahub podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this episode, I'm chatting to Tias Little. Tias has been studying and teaching yoga for over 3 decades. He takes a multidisciplinary approach influenced by not just yoga, but also Buddhism, Zen, Feldenkrais, craniosacral therapy. He is a fountain of knowledge. And he is also the author of multiple books, including Yoga of the Subtle Body, Practice is the Path, and a new collection called In the Space Between, which is a book on poetry and embodiment. It was a real honor to get the opportunity to talk to Tias, and he's going to be joining us at yogahub Camden Street over the weekend of the 17th and 18th of May, teaching a series of workshops. This one is selling fast. There is not a huge amount of space left. So if you'd like to join, you can find out more about these workshops at yogahub.ie/workshops. Here's my conversation with Tias. Thank you very much for listening. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. It's a real honor to get the chance to talk to you for someone who has been teaching yoga for a long time, the author of many beautiful and impactful books. And we're super excited that we'll get the chance to host you at yogahub in Dublin in the near future. I always like to begin these conversations with what I consider to be maybe the most important question, which is, how are you doing today?
Oh, thank you, Brian. So nice to speak to you directly and in turn to all of the community members there in your tribe, in your Sangha. And yeah, I'm good. I'm in the high desert of northern New Mexico. So here we have lots of space around us. And here in the springtime, it's wild weather, of course, but really spacious and bright. Thank you.
So I think it's always nice to begin these conversations by just taking a little bit of time to maybe hear a little about your background. This is obviously something you can speak to in as much or as little detail as you like, but it could be nice to hear a little about your journey with yoga, maybe even a little about your life pre-yoga, and how your practice has helped bring you to where you are in your life today.
Right. Well, I essentially, started on this path, and I guess it was 1985, I believe, studying Iyengar yoga, working with a lot of precision of alignment. And that inspired me, of course, to understand really structure. The body is fascinating vessel and infinitely complex. I mean, is as complex as the Dharma. The Dharma are the teachings that guide us on the path. So my investigations around the soma, around body, have been ongoing. Ever since I started on this path, and I'm still continuously learning really about structure, and then finding, of course, really how it's also not possible to really know exactly what it is that animates us. And so I've always been interested in mystery. I've always, my dad was a philosopher, and I've always been interested in the underpinnings of the yogic teachings, what we call the Dharma, and still am today. So I very much combine the embodiment practices, the physical practices, with investigative inquiries, and as rich as my inquiry can be, my spirit or my soul, continues to expand inward further and further.
I think a lot of people would know you for your work around things like meditation, subtle body, philosophy when it comes to yoga. But as you said there, your maybe beginnings was in the physical precision that we find in practices like Iyengar. And you do still find the physical practice as interesting as you did before, or has your approach to the physical practice? Well, I'm sure it has changed in many ways, but maybe how has it changed from those earlier beginnings?
I find it as equally fascinating. I'm less, driven, less, ambitious to try to attain, postures, which is very freeing to bring that inquiry into a somatic or a physical experience, and yet I think the body is the vehicle for connecting to through awareness and various levels of awareness. And so I guess it's like, I sharpen my blade. I get out my whetstone each day and sharpen both sides of my blade so that I can really feel the nuance. And it's really through the nuance of embodied experience and also contemplative experience that really opens up so many frontiers and opens us up to lots of space. Speaking of space, and that is the title of the new book that I've just released on poetry. It's called In the Space Between. So I'm always looking to come into greater opportunities for spacious awareness and invite others into that as well.
So your book, the new book, is on yoga and poetry. And so when it comes to yoga and creativity, I'd be interested to know how you feel the practice of yoga, or maybe not even to limit ourselves to yoga, but any contemplative practice, how that can assist with creativity, but equally how creativity can assist with our contemplative practice. Because from reading your books, I know that you seem to take inspiration from a wide range of places. Your books will quote Buddhist monks, and then in maybe the next chapter quote Leonard Cohen, and that sort of link between the physical but then also imagination is something which is quite prominent in your work. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear you speak a little to that link between contemplative practices and creativity.
Well, curiosity is really the key. I think, for any teacher, whether they're teaching, third grade math or geometry or penmanship, is like, really, how can we foster the curiosity of our students? And so, I mean, that's interesting. That word, of course, that stems out of the Latin cura, which means to cure or to heal. And so from curiosity, we can come to mend, the wounded soul, really. And without curiosity, I don't know what people do. In yoga, maybe they just strive to get into a pose or try to accomplish. And once we loosen that prerogative and we align ourselves with curiosity, then that serves us to be open to the new and to constant change, and we're less driven towards a goal, and permit ourselves to be with each thing as it arises. So I don't know if that can be taught. If curiosity, we could really teach that. Maybe it's partly inbuilt. But I try, of course, as a presenter, as a teacher, to foster that, and always, opening the students to questions like, where do you feel this? What's arising now? Where are you holding back? How are you hiding? How are you hiding? Or in what ways do you need to be exposed? And so, in all kinds of ways, whether it's the Zoom room or in-person events, encouraging people to really stay close with their own curiosity.
Yeah, I don't know, as you said, if curiosity is something that can be taught, but I think it is something that can be forgotten in a sense. I have two daughters. One is 3, the other is just 4 months. But particularly with my 3-year-old, you just see this inbuilt curiosity, and again, this inbuilt kind of creativity to just understand and figure out. And it's, I think one of the really lovely things about being around young children is that curiosity, if you're allowed to, is so like infectious. But maybe for a lot of us, we can forget it, I guess, as we age, as we get conditioned in certain ways. And I know for me, with the practice of yoga, as much as I learned a lot of things, so many of the benefits was actually almost like a remembering or a relearning of things that I guess I maybe once knew more intimately, maybe when I was younger. And I guess maybe with creativity, something similar. We're all probably innately creative in a lot of ways, but it's something that we lose touch with potentially as we go through life.
Yeah, that's right. I feel like the link between curiosity and creativity is a direct one, and so I'm oftentimes encouraging people in their embodied experience to not feel like they have to get it right to perform the movement correctly. It's when we assume that there's a right way of being or right way of acting in the world, is that where we really get hemmed in. And so whether it's culture or family or religion or some kind of belief system that inhibits that or some combination, that's very common. So really, yeah, the heart of the child, the spirit of the child is really, there's an inherent curiosity there. And so oftentimes it gets snuffed out at a young age. So how can we, re-inhabit that? How can we, express that in all that we do? And I think that's really, the source of what many of the texts call, the ananda kosha, or that feeling of joy or delight, or sorrow, of course, because curiosity can also, make us touch into sorrow or disgust or, or pain. And so we have to be open really to the plenum of all kinds of experience when we open up our curiosity. But I encourage everyone when they get up in the morning, to spend 20 minutes, this will be your homework assignment, just open up to being curious, like what arises now in my, the dream from last night, or my recollection of an old friend, or maybe my inhibition today, or my guardedness, my protectiveness. So what is it? So can we be open? I guess that's like Rumi's The Guest House, right? That poem, such a beautiful one by Rumi. Inviting in all of these various guests, and so can we be open to them all? So I use that in my own teaching as a means to stay as alive as I can and spontaneous, in my own work. I've been teaching, long enough where, teaching vinyasa, teaching people to put their feet in a certain way and extend their arms in a certain way, where I found myself really rote, kind of in a trough of giving directives, and I've kind of gotten myself out of that trough, and as a teacher, to be more creative, to allow, whether it's poetry or music or contemplative awareness to come in. And then always as a teacher, my great challenge, and yours will be too, as a teacher yourself, is to get out of your own way and let something else come through. And that's not easy for those of us who are instructors, is to get out of our own way. So that, of course, it brings in its own magic.
It's something I find really consistently interesting is not that it even has to be like a dichotomy, but that play between structure and freedom. I've been lucky to talk to a lot of a lot of great teachers of yoga and other practices over the years. And there's a relatively common thread that I find with them, that a lot of them will begin in very structured disciplines, be it Ashtanga or something similar, and over time gravitate towards something more gentle and free, and I guess with less rigid edges. And it's a process that I went through myself as well. And I sometimes wonder, is the rigid structure necessary to then move towards something a little bit more free form? Or do you think it's possible for, let's just call it the average person, because obviously everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different, to embrace that fluidity at the beginning straight away? Or do we need to go through, I guess, do we need to have boundaries to eventually push against, if that makes sense?
Well, some discipline is important. I really think, people don't get to their cushion, if they don't get to their mat, then they can't get into that corridor of feeling and investigative study, that vipassana, that inquiry. And so discipline is necessary. And so having a container for yourself is valuable. It's like here where I live in northern New Mexico, the native peoples from the Hopi land and the Navajo would, during a marriage, would receive a vessel. The two of them, husband and wife, would then share. And so we need a container in order for our practice to grow. And then that container, hopefully it's malleable, that maybe it comes back to its original size or it changes dimension. And so if we follow the Tao, then it should be constantly changing its shape. It should never be static or rigid. But, there are many in, religious or even, spiritual circles who default to dogma, and certainly fundamentalism, whether it's Hindu, Christian, or, Islamic. Fundamentalism could, literally ruin the planet and destroy humankind. So it's really important for, a practice of faith to constantly be able to evolve and change. And so I think in the beginning, I wasn't aware really of any of these parameters. I was kind of like a mule, with blinders on, and I was just very green and naive when I started. But I tasted really the medicine of how potent this practice is in the body-mind connection. So I think the form and the formless go together, and I think as a practitioner, I go back to form and structure, and then I let myself explore outside of the form. Then I come back to the form, and that of course is a constant dance in and of itself. But I think underlying that is the listening. I think back to the curiosity, that the listening is so important. I go back to a little Zen haiku passage from Zen master Isa, who once wrote, "Listen, all creeping things, the bell of transience." That little short verse, listen, being the first line, listen, all creeping things, the bell of transience. And so can we develop that ear, that inner ear of listening? And again, as a teacher, I'm not sure how to teach listening. I think it needs to be taught, at 7 or 8. Hard to do now because there's so much, distortion, media distortion out there. But so listening, of course, is whether you're in a structure or whether you're, you've let the horses out of the barn and you're really into a kind of formless place. Can we keep the thread of listening alive?
And so I'm guessing this is in part what led to your, at least one of the methodologies or the modalities that you would teach now, which is Satya, which, if I'm not correct, is the sensory awareness training for yoga. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the process in developing this system and the influences behind it. And I think a big part of it is obviously this emphasis on listening and attentiveness. But I think, I guess what almost goes hand in hand with that is a slowing down and a slowing down is probably the best way to describe it. So yeah, if you could talk to us a little bit about that system and its influences, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'm definitely of the slow yoga movement. There's hot yoga and there's, power yoga. And not only, am I devoted to slow yoga, but for all of us, the slow building movement, the slow food movement. And so, otherwise I think we're going to, like lemmings, run ourselves right off the edge as a race. And so really, by going slowly, we can see more, we can feel more, we can listen better. So I think speed is really demonic. When speed gets trapped in the tissues, not only does it accelerate, the cardiac rhythm and compromise immunity and throw off the hormonal balance. But people lose track of who they are. So it's particularly hard for people who are, Vata Pitta in the Ayurvedic system. People who are high burners, fast movers, can get a lot done. It's easy to simply override that reptilian brain or the biorhythms that regulate at their own pace within each of us. So speed is really ruinous to our mind and body. So yeah, weaning ourselves off of speed is so critical. So the Satya practice is done slowly. Generally, all of my own yoga is slow. I mean, not only because I'm over 60, but I really feel that is the way to yoke the Kundalini. I mean, the reptile doesn't move, unless it's being chased. The reptilian consciousness, in that diurnal cycle of, sleep and wake and breathing and regulation of blood, the circulatory rhythms in the body, it has its own pace, and generally it moves slowly, which is why the ancient yogis, I think, they really celebrated, that old brain, that reptilian brain, as being so all important, if not, semi-divine. So yeah, the Satya practice moves slowly, and the practice is done on the floor, influenced a lot by Thomas Hanna and Moshe Feldenkrais. And I'm also influenced by Continuum, which is a movement practice originally designed by Emily Conrad Daoud. So yeah, so lots of influences for me between the yoga, Feldenkrais, and dance, where the movements are slow, and then there's lots of pauses to listen and feel and commune. And so I think many listeners will have probably studied trauma, because, thank goodness, really, the awareness around shock and overwhelm of the body are available these days. And one of the ways, of course, we heal trauma is by going slowly. You can't heal trauma at speed. And so it's by slowing down that we heal the wounded heart, or we can start to mend, the broken synapses, and encourage the body's own inherent intelligence, to do its good work. What we sometimes call just working with the inner physician, to contact that inner physician, or that the medicine Buddha, that the body has its own capacity to self-heal. And so how do we contact that? And how do we allow it to do its good work? And so whether it's yoga nidra, or whether it's, yin yoga, or, slowing down in, dhyana, dharana, dhyana, meditative states, then the medicine Buddha will sort of awaken and, and do its good work.
I won't be so cheeky as to ask you your exact age, but for anybody who is watching this by video, if you're just listening, you're missing out. You look fantastic for someone in their 60s. So not that we should judge everything on visuals, but that's maybe a testament in itself to the benefits of slowing down. I'm curious. I know you describe yourself as someone who's maybe naturally a little bit slower in terms of your practice. Was that always the case? Or was slowing down something that you had to learn? And was there any resistance to that learning to slowing down?
Well, let's see. I think yoga gets better and better as we age. It's like having, a good bottle of wine around you. And so people think, oh no, I'm getting older, I can't move as well. Oh boy, my joints are getting, all like creaky and limited, but there is something about that when you're around the practice long enough, it starts to work on you, and so I was a speedy Kadeemer as a youngster, as a Pitta type, having a lot of fire, and very hard, of course, for people who have a lot of fire to manage it, because it moves quickly and it can singe other people and take on a life of its own. So yeah, my practice really has evolved over time, still evolving, and that's right. So now I move slowly, and again I'm always kind of returning to the listening, because it's there where I try to get out of my own static, my own inner conversation, and then pick up, the cue of something else outside of me. So that's a lot of where my practice lies, and certainly the alchemy, the slowing down has its own kind of alchemy, but not easy given our high speed, connectivity, 5G, worldwide today. Not easy for people to do, because people do certainly get, stuck in high gear. So finding a low gear, finding that first gear, or then eventually finding neutral, that's not easy to do, but there's power in those low gears. There's a lot of energy there, tremendous amount of energy.
I would also be someone who enjoys a slower pace of life and practice and movement. And one of the ways I heard it described before is that when we're moving quickly, we're just way more likely to be moving on autopilot. Walking fast, for example, you're walking quickly, you're probably not going to pay a huge amount of attention to the technique of your walking. You're just going to be focusing and going quickly. Whereas when you slow down, it encourages you to listen, because you, for want of a better word, it just forces your mind to pay attention to what you're doing. And it's through that we can maybe begin to notice our habitual patterns of movement, breathing, behavior, whatever it might be. And that's not always easy. That can be confronting in some ways, I guess. But that idea of just sort of taking yourself off autopilot a little, not that all of our habits are automatically bad. The habits can help us get some useful things done sometimes. But yeah, I think for so many of us, when we come to yoga, we might be drawn into the more dynamic practices, the ones that maybe lean us into the accelerator a little bit more. But I think for so many of us, actually being able to, there's a nice way to describe it, finding the lower gears, that's when we really begin to learn that little bit more about ourselves.
Right. I mean, it's addictive, right? That's why I think as a culture, worldwide, that we everything moves at such high speed. So the yogis always had this sense of, by slowing down and by being with, that there is a kind of portal or a window or a gate that one can move through that opens up to a horizon that otherwise can't be seen. You just can't see it. It's, going lickety split down the track. And so in that, if one can find that gate, and go through that, cross that threshold, there is a kind of communion that can happen, and a lot of it, I think, it's not only to stillness and to slowness, but also a kind of silence. I mean, actually, I wanted to kind of touch on one of the poems that's just come in my recent collection that's called "In the Space Between." If I could share, it's entitled "Savor the Silence." That's the title of the poem, and it came to me in my own practice of sitting. I like to sit, outside on the back porch, and at dusk, and just see the light. What's called the sandhi in Sanskrit, that in between, light and dark, and that's a real alchemical time to kind of pass through this portal or through this window, out of the familiar, out of your inbox of thoughts and all the to-do list items that you attend to. So it came to me in this sitting, and it goes like this: savor the silence today. Let it settle into your ear like fresh fallen snow at midnight, like the echo of a distant train. Let wisps of thought remind you of silence, the way cirrus clouds sweep the sky at dusk. You need not conjure silence. It is always here, now. May it protect you from the engine of your own craving, the clang and clatter of wanting anything more or less. So it goes on from there. But savoring the silence is one of the poems in this collection. And yeah, it's a precious thing, right? That stillness, that silence, and if we can develop a kind of aesthetic appreciation for it, and then we share it in a group context, that's really powerful. And share it with your 3-year-old. You're walking on the path, you hear the sound of a raven, you're like, shh. Just pause and take it in for a moment. And so when we can allow for those pauses, that's when we can kind of step through that, the veil or that threshold. So yeah, this little poem I wanted to share called "Savor the Silence."
It's a beautiful poem, and thank you very much for sharing. It's funny that you mentioned listening with my 3-year-old on Sunday, which was Easter Sunday, or actually on Saturday. We did it a day early because I had a busy day on the Sunday. Me and my 2-year-old did like an Easter egg hunt. So I hid a few eggs out our back garden, and we went down and we were looking around, and she stopped at one point and she said, "Is the Easter bunny still here?" I was like, No, the Easter bunny's gone. And she went, No, I can hear him. So we stopped, and for like a few seconds, just the two of us were just listening to, I don't know what she thought she was listening to. I definitely wasn't listening to the Easter bunny, but there's something in the stopping, and I don't know, everything just felt much more tactile for a moment. There was a real presence, and I think it was because I was listening with her, if that makes sense. I don't know, there was like a communal attentiveness that was, I don't know, it was a really, really nice moment. And even though I didn't hear the Easter bunny, there was a kind of a connection within the listening, which was quite special.
Right, and that's what people do when they come together, on retreat, or in the Zendo, to sit in silence and share that, open ear, and that's a beautiful, recollection of listening to the mystery with your 3-year-old, and so when we permit ourselves that, and again, I hope each of us will spend some time during the day, usually at dawn or dusk, to just listen to, open listening. Um, then, then there is a kind of communion with that which doesn't have a name, right? It's nirupam. It doesn't have a form. Nirmana, it doesn't have a name. Can't be seen, can't be heard. It doesn't lend itself to the sensory organs. Doesn't lend itself to the interpretive mind. And so listening to that, is really that portal that we move through in this practice. And so that's a beautiful thing, is that shared listening. And if you do that in a marriage, you're talking about doing it with your 3-year-old, but if you do it with each other in a relationship, that allows for the ties that bind to grow firmer. People don't listen to each other. Watch out, all hell can break loose. So, I really, I think of Avalokiteshvara, the great bodhisattva in the Mahayana teachings of the Buddhist path. And you probably know that she, sometimes he's described as male, sometimes female, kind of androgynous, really, is depicted as having 1,000 eyes, right? 1,000 eyes all over her body. And so she can see the suffering of the world. And that's such a beautiful image. Obviously, it's not, to be taken literally, those 1,000 eyes. But sometimes I think, what if we have 1,000 ears? So you have an ear in your shoulder blade, you have an ear in your inner arch of your foot, you have an ear in the back of your head. And then what is it like to sit? What is it like to walk with that total listening? And so that attention, that 360-degree attention is I think what the yogis pointed to when they refer to open awareness, or the pure chitta, awareness that has no barriers, right? Like awareness doesn't have a right and a left. Like, when we talk about awareness, we can't say that it has an up and a down. You can't say that your awareness has sides. Awareness doesn't have, an inner or an outer, or it's not male or female. It's not sun or moon, actually. It's not back or front, up or down. So, yogis knew that awareness is boundless. It doesn't exactly have dimension. That's why it's referred to as nirupam. It doesn't have form, or it doesn't have sides. In Zen, they say it's seamless. It's a seamless thing. And so if one, becomes somehow aware of that, aware of awareness and its own power, that I think really touches very closely into, yoga and the path of yoga. And then we yoke to that. It's not easy to yoke to that which has no form. It's not easy to yoke to that which has no sides. And so people say, well, it's sun or moon, or it's sympathetic, parasympathetic, or in-breath or out-breath. There are all kinds of ways that we talk about, a kind of polarity, right brain, left brain, introvert, extrovert, all those kinds of things. And then there's that space between, which is boundless, or it doesn't have a dimension. And so that's a beautiful thing. And so that's what we spend, 1 hour, 2 hours each day, attending to and inviting in. And closer we get to that, the more we are yoked, and the less we're really thrown by either side of the dualistic world that we all have to move through. We're less, we're less aggrieved or, caught up in the things of the world. So anyhow, I think this is a beautiful thing you talk about, of listening to the Easter Bunny that opens us up to this, this great mystery.
One of the things that I really love about your books is that you do a very nice job of grounding concepts that can sometimes be quite complex, but also maybe like untangible to at least certain people, in a very accessible way, kind of relating certain topics which might feel quite lofty to something quite concrete. And so I would love to hear you, if you don't mind, describe a little the concept of subtle body or subtle energy that we find within yoga, but also within other approaches as well. And to maybe describe it in almost like layman's terms, the most basic way possible, and why, or even if you think these concepts are still important to today's practitioners. Maybe although the average person doesn't exist, the average person that is maybe going to a yoga practice at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, are these concepts still relevant? And if so, why?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the subtle body or the subtle awareness is really where the juice is. And so, yeah, we can get so like hooked by all the tasks we have to attend to each day, and nothing wrong with that, because we, as you suggested earlier, can get a lot done. But then there's this, what we call the praxis, where you have this sadhana, you have a time of connecting into yourself. And when we touch into subtle body, then we notice really the nuance, and that really God is in the details. God is in the details, and so there's a kind of sublime that's always available. Maybe it's just like the touch of your inhalation, the tremor or the murmur of electrical flow, neurological flow down your arm. And so when we can learn to appreciate the subtle, it does open up our horizons a lot. This journey really, I think, is from gross to subtle, and in many ways, the yogic path, and it's a training, right? It is I guess we would say it's a training to be able to appreciate the subtlety, and there's a kind of aesthetic. I think there's really a aesthetic appreciation, or a appreciation of beauty that comes about this way. I mean, think of the Zen garden. You have that, really carefully manicured Zen garden with the stones have been raked, to resemble the sea, and then you have the boulders that are positioned just, to represent the mountains, just so. And then there's like this leaf in the fall that falls over, the temple wall and drops into the garden. And in Zen, that's that moment of like, how beautiful. It's this spontaneous, arising. And so if we can open ourselves to that kind of aesthetic appreciation of the breathing, or of a memory, or of a sensation, or the alignment in your, cervical spine, it really connects us to, what the tantrics in the Buddhist and the Hindu tradition, refer to as a connection to delight, to beauty and delight. So And that way we don't cut ourselves off from the world. It's like, oh, appreciate the shadow, or the way the oak tree casts its shadow and, across your kitchen window, or the way the light takes the cloud. And so, the romantic poets, of which there are many, of course, Yeats and, Wordsworth, in the British Isles, who of course were reading the Upanishads and had this, they knew that here was a common language in the post-Vedic literature, and the romantic poets, they captured this appreciation for this nuance or this subtlety, and knew that was, a gateway to the experience of the divine, or to God, or to mystery, or, to the unspeakable, to the vast, So the subtle is definitely, for me, a really Dharma door into that very thing. And it's going on all around us all the time. If only we could just take a breath and, lie on your back and stare up into the sky, or look over the hilltop, or look out to the ocean, just, for 20 breaths, or for 5 minutes, just be there, and animals will teach us this. We have a lot of, where we live, coyotes that are very wily, they're very smart, and they wander all around our property. Sometimes you see them and they just stand totally still, like the deer at the edge of the meadow, and their ears come upward, and they're just in this moment of, of pure awareness. And so, really, it's that moment of suspended listening that really, I think, connects us to subtlety.
I once heard Richard Freeman, the yoga teacher, describe the practice of pranayama as becoming a connoisseur of the breath. And there was something within that language that always really struck me, within that idea, I guess, of like a very conscious appreciation. I think he once said you almost need to become like a snob towards your breathing. And there's something within that, I think, taking like a very conscious enjoyment of things that are so easy to pass us by. There's a lot of power in that, because so many things happen that we just, for whatever reason, but I think in my case at least, a lot of it being just sort of like lost in our own thoughts. We just let little things pass us by. And that, I guess that appreciation of the vast subtlety, the like texture to our experience, is definitely something which we can gain from that slowing down, that focus on the listening as much as the doing within our yoga practice.
Yeah, that's a beautiful word, that connoisseur, right? To become a connoisseur of your own breath, or a connoisseur of your own sensation, or, a connoisseur of your own, cardiac rhythm. And so that's requires, again, that kind of listening. And rather than like mastery, what if rather than mastery, we open to mystery? And when I started practice, because you were asking me about my early days, it was all about, can I accomplish, can I do this? I get it. And that was important to me as a late teen or a 20 something. And now it's like, I'm not so concerned with getting, but like being a connoisseur of what's there, even if it's dark or it's difficult. And, I've had depression ever since I was 18. And so like when that, the shade or the shadow of depression arises, I do the same kind of investigative practice. Like, oh, what's there? What's it like? What's its texture like? What's its presence like? And can I attend to it? So then, we become, we attend to whatever might arise, if you can, attend to your own pain, attend to, the way you might feel despair for the various, geopolitical circumstances that plague the world, like Gaza or Ukraine, or maybe it's, the plight of the environment. So it's really attending to what arises that is so important. And so once we can do this kind of listening or this kind of attention, and we are receptive towards the other, that's, I think, really, maybe that's the very seed of ahimsa, nonviolence or non-harming, or satya, truthfulness, the underpinnings of the the ethical teachings in our practice. So, yeah, Richard, of course, was a mentor of mine for many years, beautiful practitioner, and he also really captured, I think, the poetry of the practice. I don't know if Richard's written poetry, but certainly he was able to, articulate and weave in language in a really beautiful way. So I have another poem. Can I share?
Please do.
It's called The Gloaming Hour. The gloaming hour, of course, means, that hour at dusk or dawn. And again, it goes back to this listening. In fact, listening is in the first line. So listen till your ears burn and the fire of your breath glows, infrared, soaking right through you from skin to soul. I have lost track of time. I've stopped counting the days, the hours, minutes. I've ceased sending and receiving too. It's then that a stupendous silence fills me, a galaxy of space, perpetually bright, spreading like saffron dye across the white cloth of my back. I am led onward by a gentle heave of breath, like the way a child rolls over in her sleep with a sigh and a soft mutter. A tiny flame flickers in my belly, then exhales its final want. Something in me gets exhausted, like the still, silent embers from last night's fire. It's then that an immensity, serenity overtakes me, the way the evening sun plummets into the ocean, leaving behind a current of white light hanging over the water. Yeah, that poem's called The Gloaming Hour. At hour, right at dusk. That's the best time, of course, to practice at dusk or at dawn. So yeah, so listening to your ears burn, right? Infrared, and then letting that soak right through you from skin to soul. So
On the topic of listening, there's an Irish musical group called The Gloaming. I'm not sure if you've ever come across them before. It's a guy called Martin Hayes, who is one of the greatest fiddle players, what we'd call it here. I guess it's like a violin. Just a real master of his craft. So maybe that can be your homework, Theus, for the next while. You can listen to The Gloaming at the Gloaming Hour. What struck me in that poem, and thank you again for sharing, is your use of the word exhausted, a word that I would always commonly associate with, like, being exhausted, and I guess a negative connotation, whereas within that poem, the exhausted is almost the creating of a space or something new, which, again, just the subtleties of language is just constantly so interesting.
right. Yeah, that exhaustion is so important on the one hand. But hey, I was thinking about this beautiful Irish documentary film I saw called Song of Granite. or if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it by the filmmaker Pat Collins. And it's about this, the traditional singers in the old style, and they're keeping this the tradition alive. A beautiful, beautiful film. I think it was filmed out on the West Coast somewhere, Galway there, Sligo. See, it's called Song of Granite. I highly recommend it. Beautiful film. So exhaustion. I mean, at some point we need to exhaust ourselves. I think it's doing yoga is a little bit like running a marathon. If you're a triathlon, you'll know about this. Is like once you get to that 18th mile, then something else happens. Something else comes in. It's like you're out of yourself. You're out of your own way. And that's that, alchemy that we always look for. And so, maybe we do this in Ashtanga yoga or a vinyasa, like you huff and puff for 2 hours, and then you lie in shavasana at the end, and you kind of, just skirt, outside of the confines of your own small self. And so that's a beautiful thing. And so, there's a way in which we have to exhaust, the small mind. We have to exhaust it. We go on this search, and we look underneath all these stones, seeking and seeking, and then you realize that the mind can't get it, the mind can't grasp it, the mind can't know it. It's irreconcilable to the small mind, and then you have to surrender. You have to sort of lay down your arms. You give up. You exhaust your small mind, and that's when we connect to to that magnum mysterium, that great thing. So it's through an exhaustion, not fatigue. That's a different thing to talk about, is physical exhaustion. No, we're talking about exhausting, that drive to get, or that will to know. And when that exhausts its final spark, that's that is a kind of samadhi, really, what the old texts refer to as a kind of totality. But our small mind is really, it's always looking to grasp. And so when that's exhausted, I think that's a good thing.
One final question I'd like to ask you. It was just something that kind of came to mind as I was listening to you talk about your move away from mastery and that kind of thing. Is we often hear when people talk about the subtle body about, balancing certain things or directing the flow of energy in certain ways. Is that something that you would subscribe to, something that you think is a useful endeavor? Or even within the subtleties of our own body, do you feel that it is still important to be open to the not knowing to a certain degree?
When it comes to balance, of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's like, that internal regulatory device within us that achieves its own kind of check and balance. We're talking about levels of sodium in the blood. We're talking about the balance of thyroid, adrenal, pituitary loop. We're talking about cardiac rhythm, lymphatic flow. Is that there's an intelligence within each of us that it's so vast, and we always say it's the most intelligent one in the room. The smartest one in the room is that. And so how do you contact that? How do you get to that? How do you permit it to do its own good work? And so there's a self-regulatory mechanism that can't be controlled. You can't will it to happen. You can't instruct it to do its work. You just have to support it to do its good work. So, I follow a lot the teachings of osteopathic medicine and biodynamic cranial work, is that those therapists, they look to support the body to do its own good healing. And so the really therapist is trying to get out of his or her way so that the client that system within the client can kick in. And again, it's super subtle. We're talking about, very fine regulatory rhythm of sleep cycle, appetite, sex drive, breathing. So how do we support it, And that, I think the ancients, they called it kundalini because it's a back brain. We're talking about, the corpus callosum. We're talking about the pons, we're talking about the deep structure in the back brain. It's that reptilian brain that governs, the autonomic nervous system. So it's all powerful. And so how can we support it? You can't make that happen as many times as you try to do triangle to the right, triangle to the left, or you stand on your head, or you hold your breath. It has to get kick in of its own accord. That homeostasis, beautiful word, mind you, homeostasis. That system within us that it finds its own checks and balances. So we try to support it as best we can. But if then we could kind of shine our lantern around in the dark, and you kind of can maybe get a glimpse of its, how it operates, and maybe your breath needs to be very shallow. Sometimes when we're doing pranayama, the breath should get very, very shallow. It's not always deep breath, big breath. Big breath is better breath. Sometimes the self-regulatory mechanism, respiratory cycle, it needs to go to naught. It almost needs to shut down and go to nothing. And if you watch people sleep, or listen to them sleep, you can see that, like, oh my gosh, the child doesn't breathe for 10 seconds, or your partner is sleeping, is kind of on a pause. So the body has its own regulatory mechanism, and we listen for it, we listen to it, and we try to support it to do its good work.
I've really enjoyed getting the chance to have this conversation with you. It's been lovely to hear you speak, and to listen. I guess maybe the theme of our conversation, the importance of listening. So I would like to finish the conversation by maybe just giving you an opportunity. As I said, we will be, we're very lucky to be hosting you at yogahub in Dublin in May. If you want to maybe take a few moments to just speak to what people can maybe expect from the weekend that you're going to be spending with us. And not to put you on the spot, but if you maybe had one more poem that you wanted to share to finish this off, that could be nice as well.
Sure. Let's see. In the event of practice, we'll do this very thing. We'll spend time just slowing down and, leaving all your luggage at the door, and just stop sending and receiving. Just attend to that fire within, and then and we'll do this very thing, this healing practice, whether it's the body in motion, or the body still, or vinyasa, moving in between postures, and so whether it's meditating, sitting upright, or being on the floor, belly down, or on our back, or doing postural yoga, half moon, bowl poses, poses you're familiar with. We'll bring those in as well. So we'll just do a whole medley of movements, and then bring in language. Of course, I'll probably share a few poems. Then, there's then invite each of us to that place. It's really spacious and is really medicinal. So last poem. It's called Ashes to Ashes. A lot of the poems that are in this collection called In the Space Between, that's just coming out this month. They're meant to support Shavasana or Yoga Nidra or meditation of some kind. So this poem is called Ashes to Ashes. I'm on my back now. at the end of a long and circuitous march across vast stretches of land, ridges, rifts, and valleys, down stairways, hallways, and through kitchens. I'm done building, raising up, and tearing down. I'm done trying to get from point A to point B. No more straight lines, no geometry. The architecture of me vanished. It's difficult to explain, and the words I form feel flimsy, like the skeletal wings of the moth found today between anatomy books on the top shelf in my library. As it is said in the common book of prayer, we therefore commit this body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This stitchwork of bones, flesh, and sinews will be but etchings in the loam. The wind drops, and a sudden stillness enters the room. I can't see it, smell it, feel it, or touch it, but they are near, like the deer on the edge of the meadow at dusk. I feel their silent bidding for me to follow into the black night, through the thicket of stars, Via Lactea, the Milky Way, to join the flying atoms, the particles of prana that have been dancing since the beginning of time. Yeah, that one's called Ashes to Ashes. Meant to kind of describe the Shavasana, where you sort of go from, you're sort of conscious, you kind of like can hear the teacher's voice, and somebody coughing, and you kind of like drift like whoosh, whoosh, right to that space, like where you don't pick up any signals, you're not really aware anymore. It's a beautiful place to be, where you're kind of half awake, half asleep, that liminal space. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Theus. As has been lovely to chat to you, it's been lovely to listen to your poetry. And I'm very excited to get the chance to meet you in person soon. I'll be definitely attending some of the workshops myself. And I'm sure it's going to be a really, really nice weekend. So thank you again for taking the time out to have this conversation. And look forward to catching up to you in person soon.
Beautiful, Brian. Thank you so much.